Good evening, friends, colleagues, and fellow Edmontonians. Thank you for being here tonight, listening to the stories of Afghan women and standing in solidarity with them. It means so much to me to be here with you tonight in Edmonton, a city I now call home. I am here to talk about something very personal, the power of journalism as resistance. But first, I want to thank the organizer of the event, the Right to Learn Afghanistan, and all the volunteers team that make this possible, and also the MacEwan University for co-hosting this in this beautiful space. When I was thinking about what should I tell you tonight that worth your time, I thought of starting with why. Why am I a journalist? And why Zan Times exists? Tonight is unlike any talk I have given before, because tonight I am speaking in the presence of someone who have shaped my sense of right and wrong. I am speaking in the presence of the woman who taught me no matter what I do and who I became, I must remain truthful. She taught me to stand on the side of powerless, to stand with people. I am speaking of my mother, Fatima, daughter of Sohrab, as she proudly calls herself. She never had the chance to go to school. To say she didn't have the right to education might not be factually accurate because there was no school in her village. My mother and her sisters are the only survivor of a family of 7. All of her family members died in the span of 9 days during an epidemic. She was raised by her grandparents, who married her off to my dad at the age of 16. And by the standard of her community, she was already too old. In my father's village too, there was no school. In Espagao village in Bamiyan, where I spent my early childhood, there was no school. And then I remember hearing my parents say, the Taliban came. I saw how food became scarce. Literally, our neighbors didn't even have dry bread to eat. Even though I didn't understand why our relatives, our neighbors, didn't have anything to eat, I saw hunger in front of my eyes. I saw what it means to not have food. And that was when my parents decided to flee to Iran. Until that point, I didn't know what school was, but I remember my mother taking my hand every morning and walking me from school to school, begging the principals to let me in, to allow me to sit in a classroom and learn how to read and write. But they denied me that right. And every time they said no, my mother cried. She wiped her tears with the corner of her chador. She didn't stop. She took me to another school and another, until all the schools in our neighborhood said no. I didn't know what school was, but my 6-year-old self understood that it was something important to my mother. And from that moment, I fell in love with the idea of school, of learning, and that love has never been satisfied. To this day, I am in search of learning, of growth. My journey started with my mother. She eventually found a literacy teacher, Farishta Arapur, an Iranian woman I will never forget, who let me and my sister into her class. I sat among adult Iranian women who had brides and grooms and many stories of their own, and there I learned how to read and write. I have lots of sad and traumatic stories of experiencing racism in Iran, which I don't want to burden you with tonight. But the reason I chose to tell this story is for you to understand why I do what I do. I grew up in a family of 6 daughters and two brothers, and my mother was always strict on principle. Her values were built on helping others, especially those at the bottom of society. She fed elderly people whose children refused to care for them, gave shelter to women fleeing abusive husbands, and bought gifts for orphans. At the time, I used to argue with her about how much she was giving away our resources, our staff. In fact, one time, she gave away one of my new shoes, which I still remember. Although at the time I didn't understand it and certainly didn't appreciate it, she was building a strong foundation in me, a strong code of principle which said you have to be on the side of the oppressed, the poor, the people who have nothing. Everyone is busy serving people who have, she used to say. You should serve those who don't have. But now you might be wondering, the title of this talk is about journalism in resistance and why she's telling us a story of her mother. But bear with me. I'm a very talkative woman, one who grew up in Afghanistan, and I often blame my culture for our need to provide context, for our tendency to take a while to take to the main topic. But the foundation my mother built in me was the foundation for journalism, because I see journalism as a profession that allows us to stand on the side of people, on the side of facts and truth. When I became a journalist in Kabul, I wanted to tell stories from the margin, from places where people didn't have access to media or to journalists. Women's stories always interested me because I was myself a woman living in what was often considered one of the worst places on the earth to be a woman, even before the Taliban came to power. I tried to bring women's perspective into my reporting, but in the conservative society of Afghanistan, there was always a limit to what you could do as a journalist, and especially as a woman. Too often, women in management role in the media didn't have real power to shape or transform media culture. In my experience, they were often symbolic figures there to attract donor money. I didn't feel supported or mentored by them. In fact, in my experience, it was mostly men who held managerial positions and had the power to make decisions. And one of those men in 2015 told me to my face, "You can never be a good journalist in Afghanistan because you're a woman." So you can imagine the kind of discrimination I was facing. When I moved to Canada in 2017, I found it difficult, if not impossible, to return to journalism. But luckily for me, I got a chance to study. And as I said earlier, I had fallen in love with learning, and I had never felt more satisfied than I did while studying at a university in Canada. In my first few months, I understood why the society was moving forward toward progress. It was because of the production of knowledge that happens here. And that's why I am so honored to be speaking at MacEwan University tonight. Universities are holy places for me. To have the chance to speak here means the world. But let me get back to the point. As I told you, Afghans love to get off topic, as my son always proudly puts it. In August 2021, I was in Toronto in the second year of my PhD. My plan was to return to Afghanistan in the summer of 2022 to do field research for my dissertation. I secretly dreamed of teaching at Kabul University's newly launched Gender and Women's Studies department. All of those dreams were shattered the moment the Taliban entered Kabul and raised their white flag. I knew right then that school and education for girls, as we had known it, was gone. And I knew that women journalists would be the first target of the Taliban for obvious reasons. In 4 months, Reporters Without Borders said that from every 5 women journalists working in Afghanistan, 4 have lost their job. And I could only imagine what that 5th journalist, the one who stayed, was facing. After crying for the loss of my country, I asked, what can I do? And I remembered, I'm a journalist. I know how to report. And I remembered what my mother taught me, that this is my responsibility to stand on the side of the people, on the side of the powerless. So I decided to support women journalists on the ground, those who caught at the intersection of 2 oppressions, being a journalist and being a woman. I started talking to friends, colleagues I had worked with before. I told them about building a newsroom that focuses on human rights, that hold the Taliban accountable, that creates opportunities and alternative spaces for women journalists to continue their work. That led to the creation of Zan Times. Zan means woman in Farsi Dari, and Zan Times became our way of resisting the Taliban. When organizing this talk, I thought, should I start with the statistics? Should I list how many media have been shut down, or how many journalists have lost their jobs, or that women journalists are being hit the hardest in a country where women are the main target of oppression? And instead, I decided to tell you stories you might not be able to find on the internet. Let me tell you how Zan Times operates. We launched Zan Times in August 2022. We made the decision to make the protection and support of our journalists the first priority and be committed to ethical journalism. While our broader mission is to cover human rights violation under the Taliban rule, we chose to focus on women and LGBTQ people, the two groups at the very bottom of society. And to cover their lives and experiences of oppression, we knew we couldn't measure success with Facebook followers, retweets, or likes. We had to protect the people brave enough to share their stories, and also the journalists brave enough to report the truth in a country where independent journalism is a crime. Most of our journalists on the grounds are women. I remember interviewing Sana from southern Afghanistan. I asked her why she wanted to become a journalist at a time when telling the truth could cost her life. She said, "I want to be the voice of women in my province." She said, "If you give me the opportunity to tell the stories of women in my community, women who have never been heard, you gave me a purpose." The Taliban took that away from me when they banned me from university, when they made it impossible for me to have a dream. She was among 533 applicants who applied to work with Zan Times, and she asked me to give her a chance. And I am so happy that I did. Over the past 3 years, Sana has reported fearlessly from shadows. She told the stories of widow and women heads of household who face daily harassment, of child marriages, of women health workers struggling under the Taliban rule, of women with disabilities, nomadic women, and children suffering from abuse. Her work has been co-published by international media like The Guardian, informing a global audience of what is happening in today's Afghanistan. To say it's difficult to be a woman journalist in Afghanistan, especially in the South, is an understatement. Every time Sana leaves home, she risks not only her life, but her family's safety. She told me 3 challenges weigh on her. First, working under a pseudonym makes it hard to build trust with sources. This is what she told me. "People are scared to talk to journalists," she said. "They think we are spies." Second, she must be accompanied by a mahram, a male guardian, whenever she leaves home. Her father and brother both work, so scheduling interviews means constantly adjusting plans. Third, she must prepare 3 different cover stories, plausible lies to use if the Taliban stop her en route to interview. Depending on where she's going, she chooses which story might keep her and her mahram safe. This fear, this constant trauma can feel paralyzing, and yet she continues. Her strength, she told me, comes partly from her father. Even every time my father sees one of my stories on Zan Times' website, she said, he says, "I am so proud of you. I never imagined my daughter would become the voice of women in southern Afghanistan." One of the stories Sana reported on was about an 8-year-old girl named Sharifa. Let me read part of that report. Sharifa, 8, sat in front of the World Food Program's office every day, waiting for the UN agency to distribute food. When it begins, she moves forward, but not to place an official handout in her white sacks. She's there to collect the grains of wheat, rice, peas, and beans that fall out of the sacks of other people. I approached her and started a conversation, asking her what she is doing there alone. People in here get flours, rice, peas, and other food items as aid every day, she says in a slow, gentle voice. Sometimes the sacks have holes in them and grains fall off them. I collect these grains and take them home for my mother to cook for us. Besides collecting grains from WFP office lineup, Sharifa also begs for money to buy breads for her family. Some days she can only get 30 Afghanis, enough to buy 3 loaves of bread. Sharifa, her 3 sisters, and their mother live in a 1-bedroom house with no kitchen and no bathroom. It looks more like a ruin. Her mother, Amina, says their misery began 2 years ago when her father, an army soldier, was killed. When her husband, the army soldier, was killed. Sana is not allowed to work. In fact, the Taliban have banned her very existence outside the home. Yet she still finds a way to tell stories of girls like Sharifa and women like Amina. It is women like Sana who are doing real journalism in today's Afghanistan. They take personal risk to tell stories of those at the bottom of society. I am so proud to support her, to help her do journalism that makes the Taliban uncomfortable and accountable. This is what I mean by journalism as resistance. It is not easy, but it is necessary. It is the journalists on the ground who are risking their lives to report the truth. This is not only the case in Afghanistan. We are seeing it globally, especially in Gaza, where journalists are paying the cost of truth with their lives. Without their sacrifices, we might never know what is happening. And before I close, let me tell you one more story about my mother. See, I love my mother so much. For the first time in her life, at the age of 63, she has a right to education. She's attending ESL classes and dream of one day going to university. That to me is the definition of resistance. That is resilience. I know that every Afghan woman and girls share this hunger for learning, for growth, and for becoming. And I want to thank you for being here tonight, for standing with them, for making it possible for some to continue their education, whether in underground classes or through a screen. Your presence here tonight gives me hope. It shows that you care. And as long as there are people who care, there is hope for change. Thank you so much.